Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and if there are 10 words that are my favorite words when it comes to entrepreneurship, then those 10 words are be the change you wish to see in the world. And today's entrepreneur is such a shining example of that because this is someone who has taken his professional career in user experience. I feel like we lose the meaning of that when we shorten it to that short acronym of UX. We forget that it means user experience. This is someone who's taken all of those experiences and rolled it into a company that is making a huge positive difference in the world for people all across the world for products that probably a lot of us take for granted. So let me tell you about today's entrepreneur and guest. His name is Frank Noz. Frank is a multidisciplinary designer with over 15 years of experience helping organizations design their way through complexity to take products from 0 to 1. Naturally curious and creative, Frank loves to design with communities to unearth the tiny details that drive change. At his company, Tandem Design Co, Frank is passionate about designing colorful experiences for everyone. Colorful is a little bit of a spoiler alert because Frank's going to get into how much he really means the fact that he focuses on color, even people who perceive color differently than you and me. And when we first came across his website, we absolutely love what Tandem Design Company, what they stand for, what their brand represents, and what they put into the world. The headline on his website is Color You Can Feel, and further down they talk about doing accessibility done bright. This is an entrepreneur who's making such a positive difference in the lives of so many people, so I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Frank Noz. All right, Frank, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Heck yes, we are so excited. Our whole team, you've interacted with our pre-production team as well. We've been so excited to have you here on the air. You've mailed me a physical copy of your product, which I think it's so incredible, the work that you're doing, because it goes straight to the fact that we take so many things around us for granted. Frank, all of that's a segue just for you to take us beyond the bio. Who's Frank? How did you start doing all this cool work?
Yeah. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm a huge fan and quite smitten to be here. So let me just first thank you and your whole team. Laura was great. My name is Frank and I'm a designer. And I've been a designer in Silicon Valley for roughly 15 years, solving problems at scale via design. Lately, my latest kind of adventure has taken me to create products that provide colorful experiences for everybody. And there's a little bit of a twist because many of my users are actually legally blind. And that's why I actually founded Tandem Design Company, or Tandem Design Co, CO. And the reason is we wanted to create meaningful connections and basically help people through thoughtful design. And part of that is bringing the best practices from Silicon Valley design to kind of products and to a very underserved community to make sure that nobody's left behind. And I'm really guided by a sense of general curiosity, creativity, and community. So for me, I believe that, even though we are all different and we want to respect those differences as much as possible, we all have this fundamental and human need to belong. And for me, that's so powerful. And that's something that I think has been a source of inspiration for me as a designer with Tandem Design Company. What's great is that design is not just about solving problems. I think great design is about affirming who we are and celebrating our shared humanity, as well as being as simple as humanly possible. And so that's why we make the products that we make, which is we make sticky notes that have Braille on them. So I'm super excited, and this is what that looks like. So there you go.
Yes, I love that overview, Frank. What I really appreciate, even just in that overview, the way that you talk about your work, it really is impactful. It's about the people that you serve, the communities that you serve, and probably a lot of people. This is an overlooked. You and I talked even off air before we hit record together today. We talked about underserved communities and all their different ways that we can measure underserved, or all the different challenges that each different community faces. In the case of Tandem Design Company, probably a lot of people don't realize, this is a stat from your About page that I really appreciate, Frank. Over 7 million individuals in the United States are visually impaired or have low vision. And there's a quote from you on your website that says, "We live in a sighted world." Talk to me about that understanding, the appreciation, the dedication and the commitment that you have to saying, hey, hold on, there's this entire community. We're not talking about a small community either, Frank. I really want to emphasize the impact of your work because it is a very large community. Talk to us about that understanding and appreciation that started you to go down this path of, I want to say inventing. I wonder if you use that word, inventing or creating products that serve them.
Yeah. Okay. So we're zooming out, right? Let's just take a big zoom out. And I know that this particular audience, which is entrepreneurially focused, I'll kind of just gear a little bit or ground a little bit of those ideas within the workplace setting, right? Because we're all familiar with. And so the question that I really think about is, why does accessibility matter in the workplace? And so we talked about, for over 7 million Americans with visual impairments, when you look at the statistics, only 44% of those people are employed, compared to 79% of people without disabilities. And those are adult American males, or adult Americans, I should say, of working age. So what that shows me is that some of these barriers that people are encountering, specifically people with disabilities, that gap kind of highlights that. And for me, what I think about is, I think that when those numbers are so big, some of those barriers are very real. That's 7 million people that are people that I interact with regularly through my user base. That's 7 million individual stories. And that to me is so powerful. And these barriers, they show up as stigmas within the workplace. They might show up as an expectation, or an inaccessible tool, or a workplace culture that's really missing out on, a group of people that have disabilities. And so for me, I think about that, and I think about what is step one. And that problem, really, accessibility is foundational to that. Without access, how are we asking people to meaningfully participate and fully participate? And so that was a huge challenge that I saw. And it comes back to some of these really interesting experiences and stories that I've had when it comes to accessibility. But I'll kind of tell you a quick story. And so there's something that's called curb cuts. It's something that we're all familiar with. And curb cuts are those transitions from basically the sidewalk to the street. We all know what they are. But initially those were designed for wheelchair users. But what ended up happening with curb cuts, and it's known as the curb cut effect, is that it started benefiting everybody. People with strollers, or people that are, skateboarders, bicyclists, rollerbladers, roller skaters, I should say, people carrying groceries. All of these people are, helped by these curb cuts. So what that demonstrates is this really interesting phenomenon, which is known as the curb cut effect, which is that when you take into account and you design for people with disabilities, those benefits, they actually ripple out and they benefit actually everybody. And so that's such an exciting opportunity, I think, as a designer. And design is part of our DNA at Tandem Design Company. So, that's kind of the story behind that.
Yeah, Frank, gosh, I love that, especially because you just brought something that's so real that, again, so much of I feel like our conversation comes to the fact that we take a lot of things for granted in life. I mean, we're not just talking about business or accessibility. We take a lot of things for granted, and the curb cut effect is something that's so real that, you're right, has benefited all of us, and we all feel that every single day. I thought my grandmother lived in New York City until she passed away at age 102, and so those curb cuts, made her walkable life possible, even in the later stages of her career, or of her life. And so these are important considerations that just make life better. And that's why, Frank, I want to call myself out, because I actually do want to change the verb that I used. I said that you invent, but I feel like it missed the mark for what Tandem Design Company is all about, because I'm actually just going to steal the verbiage that you have on your website, which is co-designing the future. It's actually less about inventing, from my perspective, than it is about co-designing. And
yes.
I just want to add one more thing, Frank, and then I want you to talk about this, because I feel like at a really simple level in business, we always talk about being customer centric, but you actually practice it because your customers help design the solutions that you're bringing to the world. Please talk to us about that co-designing philosophy and approach.
Yeah, that's excellent segue. And Brian, you're a total pro. So when I think about Tandem Design Company, we don't design for people. We design with the communities that we serve. And there's such an interesting distinction there. And it's so important to think about that and kind of how that manifested, right? So let's talk about that. As from day one, we basically partnered with LightHouse SF, and LightHouse SF is a nonprofit that serves the low vision and visually impaired communities here in San Francisco, California, where I live. And their insights, feedback, and lived experiences were really something that shaped kind of everything. It kind of permeated into the design process. It permeated into the product, obviously. And that was so amazing, because that partnership and that close engagement demonstrates like a really fundamental truth. I think that as a designer, as a professional designer, I always think about it in my own expertise and kind of humbling myself, is that design doesn't happen from the outside in. It happens with communities. It happens through engagement. It's about actively listening and engaging and basically thinking about, learning and letting the experiences of other people guide us. And I think for a lot of companies, for a lot of people, that can be a really scary feeling, right? Like that takes us out of our control zone. It takes us out of, we're no longer driving the ship, so to speak. We're driving it with people, right? Or we're following in tandem, actually, I should say. Sometimes they lead, sometimes we lead. But that's why inclusivity is at the heart of everything that we do. And when I think about co-creating with communities, the results are so interesting because they go beyond access, which is kind of like that step one. And you start creating products that are more about belonging. And for me, that's kind of that aspirational, essence of a product that changes you, whether you're sighted or visually impaired or low vision or colorblind, or you're working with somebody who is low vision or visually impaired. I think that from my perspective, it's about that ethos and products that celebrate those ethos. And we're really happy to be able to bring those products to market. And we take that quite seriously.
Yeah, I will say, Frank, as someone who has held your product, and I'm so appreciative of you mailing one of your products out to me, I'll say that not only is it the ethos, because Frank, as someone who hosts a business podcast, I talk to entrepreneurs every single day, and I feel like a lot of people, it's easy for them to say what their ethos is. It's easy for them to articulate it. Very few companies really execute at such deep of a level that the second I took your product out of the packaging, I was like, every single thing is intentional. The way that your logo has Braille on top of it. Obviously, your product is all about color. You can feel all the different sticky notes, the red one, the yellow Braille one. They all have the different Braille on that. And everything, it's not just the product, it's the packaging, it's the way that you do it. I want to ask you, get inside the mind of a founder. I want to understand, you have that ethos, and it's clear that you've adopted that so much. What does that look like when it comes to the execution, the implementation, that intentionality that you've put into all the different parts of your business? Is it a checklist? I know that you worked in user experience, so I'm really curious to get that Silicon Valley background from you. Is it really good processes? Is it external counsel? I'd love to hear about how you nail that execution of it.
That is a really interesting question. And so I think that's kind of broad, right? I think for me, that's kind of really broad. And so I can kind of speak to some really interesting moments that we had. So when it comes to like bringing people directly into the design process, that can be a little bit messy. And oftentimes we get a lot of stuff wrong. And so one of the things that we did early on, like I talked about this partnership with LightHouse SF, is that I was prototyping things and showing it to them. And a lot of the times they didn't know what ultimately the final form would look like, or kind of what we were doing. They were just interacting with these pieces of paper, and I was kind of asking them random questions, right? Or questions about their experiences with color. And so for somebody that's non-sighted, they were the most fascinating questions. Some of the most fascinating interviews that I've ever had is talking about color with people who experience it a little bit differently than me. And I think as a designer, designing products for people who don't experience color, but then they can still feel that color, that was just truly an eye-opening experience. But in one example is that, you get a lot of stuff wrong, and you have to iterate, and you have to be able to iterate quickly. And there's one example where I was working with Fernando, and Fernando was, he's kind of a tech accessibility specialist at LightHouse. And so he was going through everything. He's like, hey, I see that you use this type of Braille in these descriptions. He said, why are you using this type of Braille? And I said, I didn't know that there was another type of Braille. And he's like, yeah, you got to use this other Braille. This is not the right way to do it. And so, the product is really a culmination of just a lot of like iteration and a lot of bringing them directly into the process so that they could actually use the product, tell me what wasn't working for them, and then going from there and then continuing to refine it. So that was kind of how we bring them in. There really was no division between that. They had really more say than anyone. So it's really interesting. It's me executing against that vision and executing with their insights, feedback, and bringing their lived experiences into that product.
Yeah, Frank, I'll tell you what, I knew I was teeing you up with a very broad question, but you nailed it out of the park. And here's why I feel that you did, is because really what I heard in that answer is the execution comes from not getting it right. Here I am praising you for your packaging, your execution. And what I'm actually hearing from you is, no, you just started and then you put it in the hands of real life people who you want to serve, and you let them guide that. And I love even when you use tandem as the verb there, about sometimes we do it in step, sometimes one is leading the other. I think that it's such an important approach for all of us across all of our businesses, which leads me to something that I'm so curious about, because I think one thing that's difficult for all of us as people, and especially as entrepreneurs, is expectations. We have expectations of ourselves. We have expectations of our work being at such a high quality that we all hope for. We have expectations of the results that we're going to get when we start our businesses. So Frank, I want to put you on the spot in front of a worldwide audience of entrepreneurs and ask you about those expectations, because it's so clear to me that you have an iterative mindset, and that's probably very healthy for a designer. It probably is one of your big advantages. So it seems to me like you understand that every single step is one step of a larger process. How have those expectations evolved? When you first started, what did you think Tandem Design Company was going to be? Now where you're at in your journey, how has that shifted? And then also, as an entrepreneur, I'm just going to load it up for you to go into detail for this stuff. As an entrepreneur, how have your expectations had to shift starting your own business after such a really cool career that you've had?
Wow, that is such a great question. Oh, wow. And okay, so my expectations. I think that when I think about it, right, like I feel like deeply that this product is really about shifting other people's expectations, and it's about changing other people's attitudes, and it's about fostering collaboration in new and exciting ways with a group of people that previously may not have been able to participate or use the product. And so I think that my expectations were, hey, we're gonna release this product. We have a really good feeling about this, and can we get to market viability, right? Can we get to a viable product? And I think that was the first kind of big hurdle and big expectation that I had. But once we got kind of over that hump and we started to see that, hey, this is actually a viable product, specifically in within the workplace, or if you're creating a disability inclusive workspace, or if you're doing K through 12 education, it really shines in those areas. I didn't necessarily have those expectations. The brand is really very much kind of a sticky note in that we're kind of a platform for big ideas. And we think that some of these ideas that people are going to be using our products on, those are going to change attitudes. They're going to change expectations. They're going to invite new possibilities. So for me, I think my expectations, I'm still very much wait and see. I'm still very much looking at how people are using this. And I discover these really interesting use cases all the time where a couple, one person was sighted and the other one was visually impaired, was telling me, hey, we use the red for the dishes are dirty and the green for the dishes are clean. And I had never, in like my wildest imagination, I had never thought about that. That specific use case had never occurred to me, nor would it, I think. And I don't have a dishwasher, so I am the dishwasher. So I think that it's so interesting to see what those effects are. And I'm still waiting. I'm really still waiting to see kind of like, and hear all these stories that keep coming in every week. I get some new stories about how people experience this product and how it's personally affected them.
Yeah, I love that. Frank, you are such a talented storyteller, and it's so at the root of what you do. And I would argue for people who are saying, well, Frank's so great at telling stories, I'll just say, as someone who gets to interview people for a living, part of it, Frank, is that you really care about those stories. You take the time to hear them because your company and your product exists for those stories, for the people's lives to change. And it's so cool to see that in action. I want to go really high level here because it's something that you've mentioned a few times about the LightHouse San Francisco partnership that you have, and I love the case study that you are so transparent when it comes to sharing it, not only in today's conversation but on your website. People can read about that partnership. The challenge is written right there at the top of that case study, and the challenge, as you've articulated it, is why does color matter if your customers are visually impaired? So we hear these stories. What I imagine, and hearing you even talk about the mechanism of sticky notes and the possibilities that they open up, as a chronic sticky note user, you've absolutely nailed it, Frank. I've got sticky notes all over my monitor. With that in mind, what are those possibilities that you see, knowing that you're already making a difference? Is it about product adoption of what you've already launched into the world? Are there events on the horizon for you? How are you going to deepen that impact that you make inside of the community?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think that from a business perspective, so let's tackle the business perspective first. I think from a business perspective, what we're trying to do is create something that's sustainable and that helps a lot of people. And whenever I see my sticky notes in classrooms, it tugs at me. It's kind of like the biggest motivator is that throughout the testing, the product testing, I heard that I wish my kids have this. If I had a blind kid, I would give this to them. And those experiences are so moving for me. So I really have to kind of get back to that. So where does growth happen? I think we want to be sustainable as a business. We really want to focus on a couple of core segments, which include kind of education, especially K through 12. SPED teachers absolutely love us. We will also want to focus on growing adoption in the workplace. So if you are a team that is designing, let's say, a digital product, kind of my former life, a digital product, and that product is touching 1 billion people, and let's say 1/4 of the adult population has a disability, then that's 250 million people who you need to think about. And I think that for the people that are creating some of these products, having that physical reminder, if you're sighted, that, hey, people experience the world differently than I do. And every time you interact with that, every time you touch, and it's designed in a way where you kind of do have to interact with the Braille to kind of peel it off, that experience kind of changes you as a sighted person, and it changes your expectations and changes some attitudes too. And so I think that this product can grow a lot. And part of our success metrics is how that shifts culture and how we are inviting people into new conversations, inviting people to participate in new ways through a very simple tool that we all have. It's everyone listening right now probably has some sticky notes within reach. And how do we take a tool, a beloved tool that we all know and love, and just turn it into a beacon of inclusivity and accessibility? And that's growth to me. That's it's so poetic, and it's so meaningful, and it's so deep. And you think, oh, you just put Braille on a sticky note. It's a lot deeper than that, I think. And so the why is really why people buy our product.
Yes, Frank, in over 1,000 episodes, that right there is one of my favorite answers we've ever had here on the air. And it's because my word for the year, I'm definitely looking at things through a biased lens this year, because my word for the year is bigger. And I think that we all need to dream bigger, think bigger, do bigger things, and impact bigger communities. And so with that in mind, Frank, if the question that a potential entrepreneur or an existing entrepreneur is asking themselves, can my company, can my product or service reshape the way that we have conversations in society and in culture? Frank, you are such a clear example of the answer being yes. It's your product that here you and I are on the air in front of people in over 150 countries around the world having this conversation because of what you've designed and launched into the marketplace. So I think that that's a huge kudos to the work that you're doing. Time's flying by, and I've had this one word on my whiteboard that I said I need to ask Frank about while we're together on the air, and that is connection. I know that connection is part of the secret sauce of how you do all these things and why you do all these things. Where my head goes as a fellow entrepreneur is I know that you not only have to connect with people, you not only are part of the community that you serve and you get in there and design with them, but you also are figuring out logistics, you're figuring out manufacturing, you're figuring out marketing and sales and PR and so many other things, Frank. So talk to us about that importance of connection. How do you put it into your week, your workflows? How do you manage those connections? I want to hear, because it's so clear from the outside looking in, even before we got today, how deeply ingrained that is in the way that you operate.
Yeah, connection, I think for a brand that is a brand like us, it is very much about connection. And, I think about the fact that when you think about disability, it really matters a lot. And why does it matter? It matters because throughout our lifetimes, we will all likely experience changes in our abilities, whether those are mental or physical, right? And so I think when you kind of take that into account, that you're talking about a group of people, like 1 out of 4 American adults, this is a lot of people. And those communities, specifically the disabled communities, are some of the strongest, most amazing communities I've ever seen. And I think that when I think of connection, it's redefined what that meant for me, as a person. And what I've seen incredible strength, and I've seen incredible resilience. And there's been days when I myself, as an entrepreneur, I know we've all had those where you're just getting kicked, right? You're just getting like, oh man, this is a rough day, right? Kind of waiting for the shoe to drop a little bit. But we've all had those days where kind of everything goes wrong and another insurmountable or seemingly insurmountable obstacle comes. And I think that connection, especially that connection to the community, is really what keeps me going. And like the same time, I'll get an email from somebody or somebody will post something on Instagram. We get so much love on Instagram. It's great. And we kind of have a dialogue with the community, and we're also posting stuff too. So I think that connection and that brand that inclusion being kind of seeping through and being part of our DNA, that connection it's very real. And it's tangible, and I think it's amazing. I think it's like probably kind of part of our secret weapon, that not only are we connected to our community, but then we're also fostering all these other connections that are happening at the same time, where our community is going and interacting within their workplace or within their schools. And especially when, I have examples from adaptive art teachers who are using the product within their classroom, other teachers who are using it within SPED. And yeah, it's just kind of a really amazing thing. And we embrace it. We embrace it 100%.
Yeah, I love those insights, Frank. I will say that before you and I got together here today, I already knew that you inspire others in what you do and how you do it. But today, you've really given us so many valuable insights and inspired us by how you think as well. And I think that that's so important for us to get inside the mind of incredible fellow entrepreneurs like yourself, Frank. So I'm so appreciative of that. I have no idea how you're going to answer this last question because it's super broad, so you can take it in any direction that you want. And that is, what's your best piece of advice? Knowing that we're being listened to by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys. And as you pointed out, we all have those days where it just feels like, holy cow, how am I going to overcome this? You are a fellow entrepreneur. So Frank, with all of your experiences and you being in your own journey as well, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners with?
Okay, that's really, so I think I want to use this opportunity because I think this is a great opportunity. And what I want to say is that disability is such an amazing space to work in. And I think that my feeling is that this space has so much potential and so much room. And it's a completely underserved community, in my opinion. And I think about some of these, thinking very deeply about your product. And for us, we think about belonging. And for us, belonging is kind of like a verb, that we know that access to materials when building a kind of a culture of inclusion is really important. And think about how your products change lives. How do they break barriers? How can you create, universally designed experiences that work across modalities and that invite people to have new possibilities and kind of expand what's possible for them and whatever they thought was possible. And I think that when we think about it fundamentally, we're thinking about access, participation, and connection, right? And I wanted to make it really effortless to stick accessibility everywhere, right? These kind of little shining beacons of inclusiveness. And how do we get into people's daily routine? And what's great about the sticky note is part of us. It's a love note. It's our to-do list. It's, our grocery list. It's the symbol of ideas. And so when we think about big ideas, we think about ways we can foster change. And for us, that comes back to that belonging. So I think that just being really crystal clear about, your why, and really reflecting on that, and inviting people into that conversation. For me, that's kind of been, that would be the advice that I would say, is that I think that this space, there's so much opportunity. And, I don't know, I invite other designers out there who are thinking about starting their own thing to think about this. I mean, there's a lot of really talented designers in Silicon Valley, all trying to get somebody to click on a button. I think that, there's some really, really, really rewarding and rich opportunities for design within that space. And, hey, this is redesigning the sticky note is kind of like, I think that's a really cool thing, especially when you can make it more inclusive and accessible. So, that's kind of my advice, I would say.
Yes, I love and appreciate that advice. Frank, you got an out loud chuckle out of me when you said there's a lot of talented people thinking about how to get people to click a button, but I know that today we've really showcased doing work that matters. It is so incredible, and huge kudos to you. I want to keep reiterating it because I'm so blown away at the fact that you've taken all of your professional experiences, your skills. You're right. I admire you designers so much because you have skills that I certainly have never developed along the way. So it seems to me like all of you are wizards in what it is that you're able to dream up and actually create. So doing that work that matters. Frank, you've been such a shining example of all of that. For people who want to, hearing us on a podcast is one thing, but for people who want to see it and feel it, because that is the very nature of your product as well, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yes. Of course, we have to do the links. So if you're interested in joining kind of the conversation, we are on Instagram, and that's Tandem, Tandem, and then Tandem, Tandem, Design, Design, and then company, spelled out completely, Company. And if you're interested in purchasing a pack, please go to our website. So the best way to support us is to buy our products, right? And so we are available online, direct to consumer, through our website, and that's www.tandemdesignco.com. And some exciting news, we are actually available on Prime now. So for some of the institutional organizations that don't want to go through onboarding a vendor, you're already on Prime, you can just buy us there. So please definitely give us a follow. Visit the website and support us with by purchasing our products. I think that what we're doing is really important. And if you want to kind of hack your work culture and create an inclusive space, this might be the right product for you.
Yes, listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find all of those links that Frank just shared with us down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. His business website is tandemdesignco.com. You don't have to memorize it. You can click right on through from the show notes down below. You'll also find a link to his company's Instagram account. You'll find a link to where you can find Frank personally. If you want to reach out and have a conversation with him or connect him with someone who you've heard him on today's episode and you think, gosh, Frank needs to meet this person, we're also linking to his personal LinkedIn down below in the show notes. So do not be shy. Otherwise, Frank, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been amazing, and we'd love to come back and share with you what's new. So let's, looking forward to it.